Part two.
All of us have prejudice. I'll use the term bias, and most of it is implicit or unconscious. Okay? And therefore, all of us act on it. The way you see the world drives the way you respond to the world. Right? So everybody has it, everybody does it. But when you back one group's collective racial bias with legal authority and institutional control, it is transformed into a far-reaching system that becomes the default. It becomes automatic. It's not dependent on your friendliness or your good intention.
Nice lady speaking. This professor.
Right? So it gets embedded in all the institutions and also in cultural definitions of what's even normal. Right? What is professionalism? What is intelligence? Whose stories are told by whom? Whose stories are not told? Right? And I'm going to use an example from one form of oppression to launch us into the form we're here to talk about tonight. So we're here to talk about racism. I'm very clear you can't really separate these out. But for our purposes, we're going to take a focused look on racism. But I'm going to draw from an example from the form called sexism. And relax, I'm going to use dominant language because I'm going to use this the way our textbooks teach us. Right? So hang in there. Women got the right to vote in this country in 1920. There was only one possible way that women could get the right to vote, and that was for men to give it to us. Women couldn't vote on the right to vote. They couldn't even speak in many public forums to advocate for their right to vote. Could a woman be prejudiced against a man and mean to him in a one-on-one interaction? Of course. Could women as a group literally deny every single man in the society his civil rights? No. Could men deny every woman in the society her civil rights? Yes. And that is a significant difference that must be acknowledged in language. Right. So think about today. In 2019, I'm going to offer you a question. Today, if men as a group wanted to take away our right to vote, could they? Now that's a little easier to see today than it was about 10 years ago when I first started asking this question. But I have been asking this question for many years because this is the best example of the difference between individual prejudice and institutional power, when yours is backed. And most people, when I ask for that question, there's confusion, they're not so clear. Some people are sure that they could, some are not, which is also part of how oppression works. So let me just show you some basic statistics from 2019. The Fortune 500 CEOs are 98% male. The 10 richest Americans are all men. 7 of them are the richest people in the world. I think economic power is probably the ultimate form. The presidency and the vice presidency has always been 100% male. The Senate, keep in mind, we're celebrating the most diverse Senate Congress we've ever had. 75% male. House of Representatives, 70% male. The current cabinet, 84% male. U.S. mayors, 80% male. U.S. governors, 84% male.
Damn.
Federal judges, 87% male. Police officers, 85% male. So just ask you again, if they wanted to. I'm not saying they would. My point is, by definition, institutional power is deeply embedded in the fabric of society. It's embedded across history. These are not flexible systems. Heads up, we live in patriarchy. We live in an androcentric, male-dominated, patriarchal society. We always have, and it didn't end in 1920. And I'm very confident that if Hillary Clinton had become president, patriarchy wasn't going to end that day. Anymore, if the word patriarchy came out of her mouth, any more than we can see that racism did not end upon Obama's presidency. I would argue it got an infusion. All systems of oppression can allow for exceptions. The rule will be consistent. Right? 2019. And just in case you need a visual on my claim, that we live in patriarchy. This is the House Freedom Caucus. This is arguably the most powerful committee in the nation. Talk about making decisions at the table that will affect the lives of people who are not at that table. They're literally discussing the health care bill when this picture was taken. Right? In case you need an image from popular culture, this is cover of Vanity Fair.
chemical lights.
This is a slide I made. I don't even know who it is. I just Googled white guy. And I got this, and I thought, oh, that's a good one. If you have young people in your life, and if you have kind of self-awareness yourself, you know that children are deeply shaped by films, by media, by imagery and marketing, right? The way that they think about the world and understand the world. And all of us pretty much have been deeply shaped by film. Those who write and direct film are our cultural narrators, and they shape how we see ourselves and how we see ourselves in relation to other people. And of the 100 top grossing films of all time across the world disseminated from the U.S., 99 were directed by men. And 95 of them were white. Institutional power is the ability to disseminate your worldview to everyone and to shape how they see themselves, how they see you, how they see themselves in a relationship to you. To tell the story of the other when you are not in relationship with the other, when you don't know the other. To be able to represent the other and to do it and position yourself as simply telling universal human stories, not from any particular position. So that Mike Lee is a film director who makes films about the human condition, and Spike Lee is a black film director who makes films about black issues. So Facebook puts these things out on holidays. This one came out to commemorate the anniversary of women gaining suffrage. And then some folks did this. Which women got access to the vote in 1920? Yeah, white women. So another dimension of institutional power is that your group's experience is held up as universal. So while we were oppressed as women, we were certainly privileged as white. There is no more universal woman's experience than there is a universal human experience on the physical plane where we live in the here and now. And that recognition, I'm sure many of you know, was termed by Dr. Kimberly Crenshaw intersectionality. All right, so legal authority and institutional control is what transforms people's prejudice into a far-reaching system. So let's look at race in 2019, right? So the presidency and vice presidency, 100% white. The U.S. Senate, 91% white. I just have to point out again, the most diverse Congress we've ever had. The House of Representatives, 73% white. The current cabinet, 89% white. The governors, 98% white. Mayors, 88% white. Military advisors, just think about who we go to war with. 100% white. Federal judges, 88% white. Police officers, 80% white. The people who decide which TV shows we see, 93% white. The people who decide which books we read, 90% white. People who decide which news is covered, 85% white. People who decide which music is produced, 95% white. School teachers, 82% white. Full-time college professors, 84% white. Owners of men's pro football teams, 97% white. Owners of men's pro basketball teams, 98% white. The players, 75% black. Okay. And yet, what is the definition of a racist, of what it means to be racist in the mainstream? Right? Well, over here, it's an individual, always an individual, not a system, who consciously does not like people based on race. Apparently, if it's not conscious, it doesn't count. And is intentionally mean to them. It also has to be intentional to count. Individual, conscious, malintent across race. That is a racist. And I don't know that you could come up with a better definition to protect the system of racism than this one. Because this definition makes it virtually impossible to talk to the average white person about the inevitable absorption of a racist worldview that we get from living in a culture in which it is infused and embedded across all its institutions. Right? I think that this definition is the root of virtually all white defensiveness on this topic. Have you guys noticed any white defensiveness on this topic? Because if that's my definition of a racist, and you've just suggested I've said or done something racist, much less that I benefit from racist just by being white, What I'm going to hear is you just questioned my very moral character. And now I need to defend my moral character. And I will. So racism is a system, not an event. It certainly occurs in specific moments that we can identify, but of course it's 365, 24/7. It's the system we're in. And part of being raised as a white person in this society has been to be raised to be what I think of as functionally illiterate on this topic. I had opinions, I spouted them freely, I cringe today when I think about that. And part of gaining literacy, and of course that is a lifelong process I will not be finished on with, part of gaining literacy has been to understand the kind of collective dimensions of racism, but also how different groups of color get set up differently. So what's in my head about indigenous peoples is different than what's in my head about Asian heritage people, and that's different than what's in there about African heritage people at different levels of comfort and anxiety and interest, etc. And therefore those groups have different experiences. Okay? And it's very important that we break that down and that we learn those histories and those struggles and those stereotypes and those experiences. So I want to be really clear. All peoples who are not perceived or defined as white experience racism. And they experience it in shared ways, and they experience it in ways that are different depending on their group and its position to whiteness. Having said that, after 20 years of doing this work, I feel very clear about the following. There is something profoundly anti-black in this culture. And in the white mind, black people are the ultimate racial other. We have the most energy about black people. We have the most resentment and anxiety about black people. And when I have a very short period of time with white people, and I want you to get in touch with your early messages, I ask you to think about black people, right? And anti-blackness, there are poles. Right? White is here and black is here. And I don't have time to get into it, but there is no white without black. There's a deep need for white, the white collective. There is no superiority without inferiority, right? So there are poles. And anti-blackness cuts across all groups, including black people. The darker you are, the more compounded the oppression. And while I'm here to challenge white people in our complacency, there's a very sensitive couple questions I think peoples of color have to ask themselves. One, what does anti-blackness look like in our group, and who have I aligned with? So having mentioned history, anti-blackness, it's a system, I want to just give you one glance at the trajectory of anti-blackness since the beginning of this country to the current time to illustrate those points. And this slide will be deliberately dense, and we can think about it as state-sanctioned organized crime, quite frankly, against African Americans. And it begins with kidnapping and 300 plus years of enslavement, torture, rape, and brutality, and it carries on. About 1/4 of the way in here, bans on testifying against whites, and you are in my lifetime. 1/4 of the way in that slide, you are in my lifetime where it was technically legal to murder black people in this country. I would love to never again hear another white person say I didn't own slaves. As if that ended on that day. And about halfway in at employment discrimination, you are now in 2019 with copious empirical evidence. And if you don't know some of these things, that's on you to educate yourself. But I'm going to pick it up in 2019, and let me repeat, copious empirical evidence. Employment discrimination, educational discrimination, bias laws and policing, white flight, subprime mortgages, mass incarceration, school-to-prison pipeline, disproportionate special education referrals and punishments, testing, tracking, school funding, biased media, voter suppression, cultural mockery, historical omissions, unaddressed trauma, to name a few. It's a system. It's the system we're in, and none of us could be and none of us were exempt from its forces. And this system is not interrupted by friendliness. The system is not interrupted because I smile at black people when I pass them by or go to lunch on occasion. And African Americans are not and have never been in a position to do this to the entire white collective, and the white collective has always been and continues to be in a position to do this to African Americans. There is no such thing as reverse racism.
Thank you. Thank you. Now, for part 3, I just finished playing the game, but that was definitely the point of today. There really is no such thing as reverse racism. And we've been trying to tell y'all this. But, of course, y'all have biases. Other races of people do too. We set the trends and everybody wants to be like us, but can't be us. We're the gods, always have been, always will be. And the first creations. Now, I do believe there's divinity in my people because we have been severely oppressed and nobody wants to even think about the differences that we have in genetics and stuff and all the problems that we have and face today and where they came from and who they stem from. But something has to change.